Hey folks, this is PicoHan, and this is not the North American server. This is a replay from patch 6.8 from August of 2017, and this is on the Asia server. This is another sandbagging and operations video, but this is pretty special, or at least unique, because this is the Anthony in Killer Whale. Now, why this is unique needs a little bit of backstory. Back in the summer of 2017, Wargaming released the Dunkirk operation, and along with the operation, they released two Tier 5 destroyers, the British Anthony and the French Cyclone, both of which were only meant to be played in the Dunkirk operation. So, presumably, these ships were not balanced around normal PvE or PvP gameplay, since in Dunkirk, all you're doing is shooting at Schnellboots and shooting down Tier 1 planes. In fact, these ships were hard locked out of the normal game modes, except for a short time after the Dunkirk operation was removed. You could take the Anthony or the Cyclone into the quote-unquote normal operation of the week, which at that time was Killer Whale. And so, of course, I had to try it out just to see how these scenario-specific boats would play against more normal opponents. And just to be clear, Wargaming made a mistake in letting you do this. This wasn't actually supposed to happen. And that's why I think probably no one else has a video of this, because it was only possible for a very short amount of time, and it's a really stupid thing to do. It's already bad to bring a destroyer into operations, and back when it was Tier 5 and 6, it was bad to bring a Tier 5. So bringing a Tier 5 destroyer is pretty much the worst of everything, and you really shouldn't do it. So back to the operation for a little bit. You'll see that I shot AP at the forts in the beginning, and it did nothing. The forts are basically like armored citadels, where if your AP pens them, they'll do full damage. And the larger your AP shell is, the more likely it is to full pens. So battleships should basically always fire AP, and cruisers, it can depend on how far you are. Something like the La Galissonière can probably pen it under 10k, but above that you should use HE. One thing about the forts is that they do shoot at you, but they can't actually detect you. So if enemy ships are spotting you and the forts are still alive, you will get shot at. But if you can take the enemy forts out before you get spotted, then they won't ever shoot at you. You might have noticed that Commander Jenkins died just a bit ago. Jenkins is a bot Farragut that occasionally shows up in operations, and if he survives, you can get a one-time achievement, though it doesn't actually give you any flags or anything. It's just like an Easter egg. Killer Whale doesn't really have a strategy, in my opinion, that can make it easier, like Aegis. It's very much purely tactical in that you just have to kill the guys in the base and then get back out and kill all the guys outside. There is a little bit of trickery you can do when finishing the operation, but I'll cover it when I get there. Right now, because I'm in this crappy destroyer that, if you notice, doesn't have smoke, and I don't have premium consumables because this is my alt account and it doesn't have that much money, I'm just trying to shoot at targets of opportunity at max range and then get in cover or drop off if I need to. When my team decides they want to go in, I can go in with them, but it would be suicidal for me to go first in this ship. So the Anthony was widely considered a very poor tier 5 that would never actually hold up in the regular game modes, but just how bad is it? The numbers, if you look at them, are actually kind of interesting. I have to go look up the stats from posts that came out when the Dunkirk game mode was available. And if you look at those numbers, you'll see that the guns are practically identical to those of the Tier 6 Gallant, and they even have a little bit longer range. They have the same alpha and the same DPM, and probably the same ballistics as well. Real quick here, an excellent illustration of why not to bring destroyers into operations. These warehouses and such that you're supposed to destroy, you're supposed to hit them with HE. A cruiser, even a mediocre one like the Galissoniere, can take these things out with one salvo, and it's taking me 5 or 6 in this ship. You'll also notice the very slow shells on this ship, which are basically American rainbows. The actual range is supposed to be 10.8, but I've got AFT and BFT because of the Dunkirk operation. I want to boost the AA to shoot down those Tier 1 planes. But you can see I can get maybe 3 salvos in the air before the first one comes down. Rainbow arcs are of course a pro and a con. A pro because you can lob things over islands, and a con because it can be very hard to hit moving targets. In this operation, since most things are stationary, it doesn't actually matter. The fire chance is also 8%, which is best in class for a Tier 5 destroyer, right up there with the Podvoisky. Even the Minakaze doesn't have that fire chance, and that's per shell. So the torpedoes. The torpedoes are also similar to the Gallants, but unlike the guns, the torpedoes are a marked step down. They do have a little bit more alpha damage, but they reload slower, and worst of all, they have 2 kilometers less range. So 6 kilometer torps with your 6.7 base detection means that it'll never be able to stealth torp. This ship might have, though, the best torpedo alpha strike of any Tier 5 destroyer, because nothing else at this tier has a 2x4 launcher config. The Nicholas does have 2x3 on both sides, but the effective alpha is only one side, I would say. But that's an interesting tidbit either way.
Engine boost activated.
So now the first part of the operation is complete, and the first part should be pretty straightforward. Usually it's not if you finish the first part, it's if you finish it without losing too much health or too many ships. One thing you should keep in mind is, especially if you're in like a slow battleship, you shouldn't go too deep into the base so you can support leaving the base more easily. Speaking of speed, this is the slowest destroyer at tier 5 with a blistering top speed of 31 knots. This is a big downgrade from the next slowest thing, which is probably a 34 or 35 knot ship. Just like when we came into the base, I'm going to try to do the same thing going out, which is try to keep the focus fire off of me and just put the DPM where I can. Even though I'm in the wrong ship, I think this is still the right thing to do. This part of the operation is kind of like the end part in Aegis, where there isn't really a right enemy to shoot at since they all drive around in fairly erratic ways. You just have to shoot the one that's closest, or you can get the best shots into. You see how smart that bot was? That bot dropped his torps and then he smoked up. You don't see that in co-op. Luckily and hilariously maybe, my crappy 6-kilometer torps finished him off because smoke is of course a torp magnet. Shooting at the Kolberg here at near max range, you can see just how hard it is to hit anything with these guns after a certain point. Like I said earlier, these are really American-esque guns where you gain DPM at the cost of being able to use it effectively at range. The DPM is actually just shy of that of the Nicholas, and you have a much bigger fire chance. You could almost say that these are the best destroyer guns at tier 5, but you pay a hell of a lot for those guns. You can't stealth torp, your speed is slowest in class by a lot, the HP pool is actually not the lowest like the speed, but it's among the lowest at 11,200. And maybe worst of all, for a destroyer at this tier, you don't have smoke. And maybe an experienced player can play around that, but what do you get instead? You get defensive fire, which is really only good for panicking planes, since your base AA DPS is basically non-existent. It's only good for shooting down those tier 1 planes. So this is a bad ship without a doubt, but maybe not so bad that it couldn't be competitive in its own way at, say, tier 4. Either way, I still think it's interesting to watch it play outside of the silo that Wargaming intended it to be played in. We're reaching the end of the operation now, and I just want to point out something that everybody seems to forget or not understand. The way to end this operation is to have half of the alive ships in the capture point. This means that if you started with 5 ships and you sent 4 ships to take out the ships in the first wave, they can all die, and as long as the 5th ship is in the cap, you can still get the 5-star in the operation. This also means that if you're in a slow ship and you can't make it back in time before the game ends, it might be better for you to die such that you can have half your ships in the base. Finally, because of this mechanic, you have a large degree of control over when you end the operation. This means that if you're very close to finishing off the ships in the 4th wave, and you're close to the cap, you should slow down and wait such that whoever it is can finish that ship and get you more stars. In this game, the Ryujo might have been able to finish the Kaiser for the 5th star had the Buddy Oni decided to wait. And it was very safe for him to wait too, because if he died, there's still me to finish the cap, and if I die, the game would have ended automatically. I didn't save all of the results here because it wasn't a very impressive game with our meager 50,000 damage, but we did get almost 5 stars, and we weren't last either. So hopefully this was at least a little bit interesting, and have a nice day.